Okay. It appears that we are actually successfully live. Yay, go us. Okay, hello everyone. We are now up to I am glad to announce that this is Divine April 12th, 2026, Divine Mercy Sunday. And we are here because it is Sunday and that's what we do. We are up to 58 subscribers. Like, share, and subscribe. Can we make it to 60 by the end of the stream? Probably not, but I mean, yeah, at the rate we're going, there are certain channels that we might be too important to, comment on in like 10 years. So we have hope. Okay.
Does that mean we are free from them?
Well, although I will make a quick announcement up front. There is an excellent channel that's doing a lot of good stuff called The Flying Kitchen. It's done by Susan Vayak, who's been doing a lot of good work kind of on like the day-to-day, like, meat and potatoes, like, okay, this is what's going on today reporting. So I think that now that somebody else is doing it really well, we'll probably step back a little bit from the specifically political aspects, and we'll be more offering sort of church history and like kind of what you need to know about the contemporary church to understand politics, rather than commenting on the politics itself. Also, I just get way too angry. I'm sorry. Most of my gene pool comes from the British Isles. We are a belligerent people. Like, there is a joke which, although probably has never heard, that 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 Irish families save money on wedding announcements by telling everybody to just read the police report, and then you'll know who showed up to the reception. They had calmed down by the time they got to my generation. Okay.
Interesting.
So anyway, perpetuating stereotypes from a previous generation aside, we are here. It is Divine Mercy Sunday. That is the second Sunday in Easter. It is the last Sunday in the octave of Easter, which is like the super special, like 8 days after a big event. And it is also Orthodox Easter. So if you're Orthodox, hey, happy Easter or happy second Easter. Why is it Divine Mercy Sunday? I'll be giving a big rundown about the whole Divine Mercy of it all on Tuesday. But the thing to know right now is that the Feast of Divine Mercy was instituted in the 80s by Pope John Paul II. It's basically it's sort of the newest hottest it's the newest devotion to like really go viral and really kind of change things. And one of the things that it changed was it got rid of what on the old calendar was called Low Sunday, because it's like Easter, but it's like Little Easter. It's not as Eastery as the other Easter was. Whereas Divine Mercy Sunday is basically is about this devotion to God and devotion to the mercy of God, and the belief that everyone will be washed clean by the blood and water that flowed from the heart of Jesus as a font of mercy for us, and we can trust in that. It's also the reason why in the few days leading up to Divine Mercy Sunday, a lot of times people will go to confession again before this Sunday. That is because that nice auto reset that you get on your soul when you're baptized. We were talking about that. Well, you can also get that on Divine Mercy Sunday. All you have to do is take communion after having gone to confession, and you're good, at least for a year. So you just have to make it from now until Easter. You can be okay. which is
Well, I mean, isn't this still Easter?
well, yeah, but until like the new Easter. Like we use all this Easter up, and then we have Pentecost, and then we wait a whole year, and then we get Easter again.
Oh.
And then, so you would have to make it from here till the start of the next Easter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I do have to say that, like, as much as I like Mass being normal on Easter Sunday, there's something kind of trippy about you're there at like 6 in the morning and you're going, I confess to Almighty God and to you, my brothers and sisters, that I have greatly sinned. And you're like, okay, it's 6 in the morning. I went to bed at 11:30. There is a limit. Okay, I'm not saying that it's impossible, but then you think about it and you're like, no, you know what? I was kind of crabby when we were getting home on the way, and maybe I shouldn't have said that thing that I said. So, let's round up, right? Maybe I didn't like break a commandment, but am I without sin? No. But so you get that experience on Easter, and then it's like today, it's like, hey, have some extra mercy. So it's pretty cool. We like it. Okay. And the other thing that we like at Nerd Church is going through biblical readings and trying to figure out what do they mean and how can we read them without being weird about it. And
You probably should stop saying that because I'm probably weird about everything.
okay, that's true. Okay, not being dumb about it, because we are not dumb about anything. And also sometimes we try to help, scholars who are raised Protestant realize that not everyone else was. That you're there to help with this too.
I'm the Protestant voice in the room.
Exactly. You're the Protestant voice in the room. You're the one who goes, when I'm like, as it says in the Litany of Loretto, and Aldo's just sitting there going, yes, it does indeed say that in the Litany of Loretto. And then you're going, what's the Litany of Loretto?
Who is Loretto?
Who is Loretto, and why does she have a litany? Actually, hilariously, my late grandmother's first name was Loretta. And there's actually there's actually, I think, a non-zero chance that that was where her mom got her name from. It was just that she was not Catholic. She was just in and out of reform schools, some of which were run by nuns.
That'll do it.
Yeah, that will do it. Okay. So it is and I should mention also that because it was a different holiday on the old calendar, that a lot of traditional Catholics are really, really mad about it being Divine Mercy Sunday, because how dare you change the calendar to put mercy in? And it's like, yeah, that is a thing to be upset about. I am sure.
That is
Yep.
one wild thing to even think.
Yeah. But today we don't have to worry about that, because it's just because you know what, whether anybody likes it or not, it's Divine Mercy Sunday. And we got a bunch of people. So let's go. We've got some stuff to do. So let's go. We are back in Acts. We have Acts chapter 2, 42 through 47. Aldo, do you want to go?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. They devoted themselves to the teaching of the apostles and to the communal life, to the breaking of bread and to the prayers. All came upon everyone, and many wonders and signs were done through the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their property and possessions and divide them among all according to each one's need. Every day they devoted themselves to meeting together in the temple area and to breaking bread in their homes. They ate their meals with exaltation and sincerity of heart, praising God and enjoying favor with all the people. And every day the Lord added to their number those who were being saved.
Okay. And then here we go. We have Psalm 118, 2 through 4, chapter 13 through 15, and 22 through 24.
Let the house of Israel say, His mercy endures forever. Let the house of Aaron say, His mercy endures forever. Let those who fear the Lord say, His mercy endures forever. I was hard pressed and was falling, but the Lord helped me. My strength and my courage is the Lord, and He has been my Savior. The joyful shout of victory in the tents of the just. The stone which the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. By the Lord has this been done. It is wonderful in our eyes. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us be glad and rejoice in it.
Okay. And then Amanda, you get First Peter chapter 1, 3 through 9.
Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who in his great mercy gave us a new birth to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading, kept in heaven for you, who by the power of God are safeguarded through faith to a salvation that is ready to be revealed in the final time. In this you rejoice, although now for a little while you may have to suffer through various trials, so that the genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that is perishable even though tested by fire, may prove to be for praise, glory, and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Although you have not seen him, you love him, even though you do not see him yet now believe in him. You rejoice with the indescribable and glorious joy as you attain the goal of your faith, the salvation of your souls.
Okay. And the gospel, we have John 20, and then it's 19 through 31. So a nice short one.
Okay. Oh,
comparatively.
Compared to all the Easter ones, all the Holy Week ones.
Yeah.
On the evening of that first day of the week, when the doors were locked where the disciples were for the fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood in their midst and said to them, "Peace be with you." When he had said this, he showed them his hands and his side. The disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." And when he said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit, whose sins you forgive are forgiven them, and whose sins you retain are retained." Thomas, called Didymus, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples said to him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, and put my fingers into the nail marks, and my hand into his side, I will not believe." Now, a week later, his disciples were again inside, and Thomas was with them. Jesus came, although the doors were locked, and stood in their midst and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands, and bring your hand and put it to my side, and do not be unbelieving, but believe." Thomas answered and said to him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you come to believe because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and have believed." Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples that are not written in this book. But these are written that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that through this belief you may have life in his name.
Okay. I think taken as a group, like this is a really nice set of readings. We were talking about we're still in Easter in the sense that this is, up until Pentecost, it's the Easter season. but in a lot of ways, you can see Divine Mercy Sunday as kind of ending that first 8 days of Easter, and it's putting a very nice end on it, right? So it's like so if you think about what it's doing in terms of like liturgy and ritual, it's like you get Lent, you get Holy Week, you get Easter, you kind of get this week to be just like, ah. And then you get Divine Mercy Sunday, you close the book, everything's reset, you're ready to just kind of like think about yourself and go forward. And that's not a bad, I feel like this is one of those points where you can kind of point to what's going on psychologically and say that, like, if that's really what you're doing, that's what makes a liturgical cycle good, is it kind of, it gives you something that you're doing and you're working for. And if something happens in your life and you just need some time to kind of think about it, you can at least go, okay, dude, like it's Holy Week. Give me like 3 days to like do my religious stuff and like really get through my feels. And, it's nice to have that pause and that break and that kind of reset. And I know, not, it wasn't exactly a year ago because Easter was late last year, but in the week after Easter, like everybody was like just in mourning for Francis. Like we were, like anybody who was Catholic was just like feeling, like a little bit from a little bit sad to prostrate with grief, depending on who you were and how, well you knew him personally or how well you were into the Pope. And kind of having that moment, I remember last year kind of having that moment of like coming together and continuity was really good. And it kind of, everybody's there like praying for praying for his soul and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of where we are with this, like sort of with the 1,000-foot view. Did anybody else have any observations to make? No, Anglicans don't do Divine Mercy, do they? That's way too new, right?
No,
Yeah.
it was just a regular
Yeah.
Easter
Yeah. Okay.
season service.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Mother Nan wore white. The church is still decorated for Easter.
Yeah. Yeah.
That kind of stuff, but nothing particular. We used we had something slightly different in Acts. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was same. I just noticed how much the readings were very much focused on the exactitudes of the early church.
Yeah. And
because the Thomas story is really, I think, I mean, it's always been put, a lot of context is taught about like, you shouldn't doubt or whatever, which is dumb.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll get to that. I don't want to skip ahead to the gospel just because this is one of my favorite gospels. And if we start talking about it now, like we will do like a 5 hour just like, oh my gosh, did you see this part? And yeah, it will be fun.
Well,
so yeah, so let's look at this. Okay, so we had Acts, and I didn't feel like, I mean, for the people who are like, well, Acts isn't history, like this is just kind of one of those, like nice little, like almost two packaged, like, okay, this is the early church. This is what people were doing back in the day. And that's really, just kind of how it is. And I kind of want to push back on that a little bit because it seems to me that when we're talking about the first century, we're talking about a lot of stuff where like genre hasn't quite happened yet, where it's like you kind of have an idea that there's a difference between like history in the sense that there are stories about things that actually happened, and there are just like stories that are made up. And obviously you have poetry, which is different. Like you're starting to get novels, right? You're starting to get poetry that's separate from prose, and you're starting to have stories that are made up about real life. But it's all really fluid. And I would just like to suggest that, like, maybe by obsessing about gender, not gender, but by by obsessing about genre so much, we're worried about what kind of story is this, and how should we evaluate the story based on what kind of story it is. And I think maybe sometimes it just makes sense to say this is a story, right? This is a story that the early Christian community was telling to it's a family story, right? This is the story that the early Christian church is telling to itself, about who and what it is. So, does it matter if is Acts history? Maybe. I mean, I can tell you a really good story about and I probably will and I probably will put this up as an episode just because it's a funny story, right? I can tell you a story that absolutely happened about about a guy who got his boat sunk because basically his former father-in-law thought that his daughter had been done wrong, and I don't think that he was wrong. Nobody got caught. There is no archaeological evidence except the boat at the bottom of the lake. And everything that was said between men at the VFW Hall, the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall. It left no records, but it happened. And maybe I didn't get all of the details exactly right from my grandma, but it's true enough that if I told somebody that story and explained all the parts, you would understand a whole lot about racial politics and like just kind of race relations in general in Southern Illinois in the mid 1980s, and the way that like gender politics were thought of. You know a whole lot. And if you know a whole lot about that, and I'm sorry, whenever I start talking about Southern Illinois, my accent comes roaring back from wherever like years of living in Arizona has stuffed it. And I apologize if all of a sudden you're sitting here and you're like, why was she suddenly talking like that? Well, I'm suddenly talking like that because I got used to talking like this when I'm not talking about my family. um, but that's the point, is that, we're looking at this really weird time period where things are changing a lot. And, maybe that's what Acts is about. Maybe it's just like, okay, this is what we do. And maybe it's interesting to just say, okay, why was that the story? Why did this story win out over other, like, why do we have this instead of the Didache? Right? Because the Didache also tells the community what it's supposed to be. But the Didache didn't make it into the canon, even though the Didache was probably written down before this was. I don't know. I am not qualified to have opinions. I am merely qualified to have questions. I keep hoping that, we'll hit 100 subs and we'll be important enough to get response videos.
We're getting there.
Oh.
Yeah. I don't know. Dan McClellan makes videos for people he likes. sometimes.
Are we
Sometimes.
likable though?
I don't know. We might be. I don't know. But because I think I don't know. I have this idea. I'll stop now. But I will. I just want to finish by saying that I kind of have this idea about the process of canonization kicking around in my head that says that like stuff didn't make it into the canon for a reason. And maybe if we go back and sift what made it in and what didn't, we can kind of see like what the thought process is. Because I don't know about you, but I have had to like actually like like if you go through like any source text and you put together an anthology, you will make choices. And the choices that you make tells people a certain amount about you, maybe.
I mean, I think it's pretty. If we're talking about the Thomas story, I think it's pretty obvious why it's there.
Well, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, okay, but before we get to Thomas, we have to get to Peter.
Okay.
And or actually, let's get to the Psalm. We'll let this is like New Testament heavy, so we will let Aldo have his moment of glory, and actually getting to talk about something that he's super interested in before I explain why the theology of Peter is really important here. But anyway, I have to run to the restroom while Aldo is making everyone smarter.
Sure. Well, regarding this psalm, I think the most salient feature is the idea of the how are they called here? It's let those who fear the Lord say His mercy endures forever. So this is a phrase which denotes or which singles out a group of people. And it is interesting how this term is used along history. So starting with the Hebrew Bible, it is those who fear God, those who fear the Lord. Scholars do not actually tend to agree as to who these people were. Something that it just means a group of pious Israelites. But some others think that it may even point to Gentile people who recognize or in some way revere to the God of Israel. And then this idea is still transforming. I'm going to skip to the New Testament, and then I'm going to go a little back just to show you how this idea is evolving. And of course, the Book of Acts is big on these kind of people, the God-fearers, in the sense that they are somehow a bridge between the Jewish people and the Gentiles. So these God-fearers are Gentiles. God-feeders are Gentiles who are, in some way acknowledging the message of Jesus, and thus in some way acknowledging part of the Jewish religion. And it is to them whom the gospel is then preached, as in the Book of Acts. But if we go, and then we have rabbinic literature, which is some 2 centuries later, and they also speak about the God-feeders.
I know it's a horrible word.
Especially when I have the two
Yeah.
the pronunciation of Spanish R and of English
Yeah.
R.
Yeah.
It's very confusing for me.
Yeah,
On my
exactly.
tongue, at least.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to try not to roll your R's. Mine just don't go anywhere.
Exactly. Anyways, so and then in rabbinic literature, it is these people, I will call them that from now on.
Yeah.
So
Them. They know who they are.
exactly. Now you know who they are. So they are also pious people, but then the rabbis do make a distinction. So they talk about what is called the Ger Tzedek, who would be like a pious resident, and that is a fully converted Gentile into Judaism. And then there are these God fearers, and then they are like people who live in the periphery, so they may offer some sacrifices to God in the temple. They may go to the synagogue, but they do not participate in the Jewish rituals in the sense that they are not circumcised, they are not of a Jewish lineage. And then just to close this section, it is what then becomes the Noahites, who are the people who keep these supposed 7 laws of Noah, which are never perfectly delineated or defined in rabbinic literature until many centuries later. And now let me go back to the time of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So for those who do not know, there is a sense around the interwebs that the people who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls were these marvelous people who were like I tend to think of them, or at least the way people conceive them as a kind of hippies, new agey group. But in fact, they were like revolutionary people, apocalyptic group who secluded themselves from Jewish society because of purity laws and because they thought of them as sinners.
Yeah.
So for
If
those,
if I can just put in for a second,
Sure.
I will say that I think that a big part of the reason for that going on in the historiography
Mhm.
was that initially the reports on there were done by Catholic monks, right?
Right.
So they just saw, oh, it's a bunch of guys living together in the desert writing a bunch of texts. Well, and it was, and to be fair to them, it wasn't just a like, oh, yeah, we understand that that is a thing that people will do. I think that what was going on, it wasn't just like, hello, fellow monks.
Mhm.
It was also that they were also very aware of the tradition of the Desert Fathers. And the Desert
Mhm.
Fathers were like basically that's where monasticism comes from. But it's all these people who are going out into the desert, um, you know, like more like North Africa, Egypt, like that kind of
Mhm.
area. But they're going, and this is happening like pretty early, like early second century. You have these people, they're going out into the desert, they're studying texts. There's this one guy named Simon Stylite because he had a giant pillar and he sat on top of the pillar and just like prayed and meditated and all that kind of stuff. And oh yeah, the desert fathers are wild. Like you've got like Mary of Egypt who's like running around with no clothes on, but her hair covers her whole body. Like if you ever see a picture of a saint and she's like just like a face and arms and hands and like cousin it hair down to her knees, that's Mary of Egypt. Well, um, who actually apparently really was like a courtesan who was very good at her job, who converted and donated all of her money to the church. And it's possible that the whole Mary Magdalene was a sex worker thing comes from traditions that confuse Mary Magdalene and Mary of Egypt, who are two very different Marys. Um, but the point is that one of the questions in church history has always been kind of like, well, where did the Desert Fathers come from? Right? Like, where is the like, because like, that's not something that really happens in the Mediterranean in general, like kind of outside of like what's going on in the Judean desert. So there was also kind of a feeling of like, okay, well, maybe we've cracked it, right? Maybe we figured out where this came from, because obviously after 70, things are going to be different, right? And
Yeah.
so maybe the same kinds of people who had been going out into the desert just went out into a different desert. Um, it's not that, and to be honest, like, there is a real scholarly argument that's being made that the guys out there at Qumran really did give impetus to the whole monastic movement. Not so much because there's like a historical line from like this dude, this dude was at Qumran and then this dude went to the desert and started praying, kind of thing, but in the idea that like going out into the desert to live this life of purity was something that was a really good thing for people to do. And that's where that gets in. And then of course there's also the fact that, like, this happens during the 60s, that because the Dead Sea Scrolls, they get found, what, 1940, 1947. They first start getting published in the 50s. They don't really start a track, and it's a slow process. So when's the first like actual, like, like if I wanted to buy a book that had even a partial translation of the Dead Sea Scrolls, when did that happen?
Don't quote me on that, but it was until the 1950s, like 1954. There were
Yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah. So well, yeah. So like mid 1950s. Um, so like that means that as these ideas are starting to float around, like just kind of in the world in general, um, it's the 1960s. You have, it's a period of political and social and economic upheaval and unrest, and you do have like all of these, like, different kinds of intentional communities and religious orders and this and that and the other. And people are, they're just kind of playing with, okay, this is what we want the world to look like. And it's not hard to see why people who were living at the time would immediately go, okay, we know what this looks like, right? We know that in times of upheaval, people sometimes just like go out into the desert and get weird. The problem was, as Aldo referred to, is that in we hadn't had a violent messianic movement for a really long time in Christianity. And this is where, like, and I will probably continue to keep coming back to this in the hope that somebody will eventually like listen to me, if only to ask me to shut up. I think that people who are studying Qumran need to study the ghost dance. The ghost dance, if you're not familiar with it, was a apocalyptic movement that existed among the Lakota in the Great Plains in what's now North and South Dakota in the mid 19th century. And the Lakota people had spiritual experiences, and they were told that if they engaged in these particular rituals, that they would have military victory. And as Dr. Justin Sledge says, if your military plan, if your plan for success involves, bands of angels coming from heaven, go home, stay home, right? And the ghost dance guys didn't stay home, and it went about as well for them as it did for we know what happened in 70. But the other thing that makes the ghost dance example really, really interesting, and I think that it would be good for somebody to look at this, is there is a book called Black Elk Speaks. It's a horrible, overly romanticized book. There's also a book called The Eighth Grandfather, and that is the raw transcript of Neihardt and Black Elk's interviews. And what Black Elk is talking about in there is a lot more complicated because Black Elk was a failed messiah. When Black Elk was a young man, he had a vision in which he was told that if he performed a particular ritual at a particular time, that people of European descent would be removed from the continent. And he wasn't sure if he wanted to do that. And one of the things that he did was he joined Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show. And he went to England and he got really sick. And he was taken care of. And he was treated like a person. And he came back and he decided that he didn't want to end the world. And he didn't. And he made that choice. And he lived with that choice. And at the end of his life, he talked to somebody about it. And again, I am always hesitant to suggest that people draw one-to-one distinctions and discussions, because obviously nothing is the same, right? But at the same time, it's like, my friends, we have a case study of a failed messianic apocalyptic movement, and we have a book this thick that is an interview with a failed messiah. Maybe somebody should read that and see what if these two groups of people could have talked to each other, what would they say? But I don't know. There's not a lot of data in there, and data's king. I don't know. All I know is I would have been a really good historian, but Herodotus's job no longer exists. So I'm going into religious studies where you can still do pretty storytelling. Because ultimately it's all about figuring out the stories. Okay. So we've had our psalm. Was there anything? I'm sorry, I interrupted you and went on to a huge rant, although did you please just keep going from where you were.
I was almost done. So the idea is that we have in biblical literature this concept of God-fearers, and then it transforms during the New Testament era and later into rabbinic literature. But if we go back to the Dead Sea Scrolls, since I was mentioning that the Essenes, who are most likely the group who were behind the writing of the Dead Sea Scrolls, they were an apocalyptic movement. So if they rejected the other Jews, all the more they rejected the Romans. So the Romans or any other kind of Gentiles. So the concept of the God-fearers is transformed in the sense that they identify themselves as the God-fearers, and there's no room for anyone outside their particular view of Judaism as coming close to God. So that is, an interesting way to round up the psalm, and the way the ideas which this psalm exposes have been taken up by different Jewish communities.
Okay. And then we've got our Peter. Let's see. Yeah. I mean, this is obviously just kind of like the little Peter summaries here of what's going on. I did want to say just a couple of quick points. I think that there's a couple lines in here that I thought were super important for kind of like what happens later, at least in Catholic theology, because it says, "In this you rejoice, although now for a little time you may have to suffer through various trials, so that the genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold which is perishable, even though tested by fire, may prove to be for praise, glory, and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ." And I think that that's important because of the way it talks about suffering. Because I think that it can't be overstated how much in Catholicism, suffering is not necessarily bad. There's this sort of acceptance that suffering is part of the human condition. And it may be good, it may be bad, it may just be something that you have to put up with. But there's not this inherent, and of course, that can be used to convince people, oh yeah, you're not suffering enough, right? Can you still get out of bed? Then get out of bed and deal with it. And that's not good, right? But there's also the good version of that. And the good version of that is to say, yeah, and it kind of, I don't want to say that it gets rid of the problem of evil, but it kind of sets it aside, right? Because it's kind of taking that question of like, well, why is there suffering? It's like, well, why is there suffering? We can talk about why there's suffering, but at the end of the day, knowing even if you knew why suffering existed, people are still going to suffer in some way. So maybe the more important thing is to know that in the end, that, it's going to be worth it. And I don't know, like, I kind of think of it as like when it's like you go to you go and you get a vaccination because you don't want to get sick and you don't want to spread disease. And even though like it doesn't feel good to get a flu shot, right? And when you're a little kid, getting, oh, I have to get a vaccine, is the worst thing ever, right? It's like, oh, because you're going to feel yucky, it hurts, you're going to get poked, all that kind of stuff. But you got to do it. And you just do it. And you know what? If you sit there and are tough at the doctor's office, then maybe, you get ice cream on the way back. And I think that, I don't know, people always say, like the problem with Christianity is it's pie in the sky when you die. But which, it's true. If you only get justice in heaven, that's not okay. But if you get, at least that even if you don't get justice on earth, eventually there will be something. And like, I don't know, a bowl of ice cream on the couch when you're sick can still make things better, even though you still had to get sick. I don't know. That's kind of how I think about it, but I'm probably feeling overly optimistic because, it's Divine Mercy Sunday. Which is kind of the Sunday in which we celebrate the triumph of hope over experience. The other thing that I wanted to highlight real quick is the more precious than gold that is perishable, even though tested by fire. That image of gold in a crucible, of gold that's being heated and melted and having everything taken away that isn't gold, is going to become something really special when Gregory of Nyssa gets a hold of it, because he uses that to turn it into apocastasis, which is as close as Catholics can technically come to universalism, which is to say that basically your soul is your soul and what you do is what you do. And in the same way that if you have a nugget and the closer that nugget is to pure gold and you toss it in that crucible, it's going to melt. And then it's just gold. But if there's a lot of stuff in there that's not gold, then that's going to get burned away. And maybe if you have something that's just a lump of clinker, that's just going to sort of sink to the bottom of the crucible and nobody's ever going to see it again. But at the end of the day, it's about the person and their choices and what they do, right? It's the idea that like heaven and hell in some way can be thought of as just you stand naked in front of God and say, this is what I did. And God says, yeah, I know what you did. How do you feel about that? And then God says, how do you feel about that, knowing how it looked from my point of view when you did that? And then you just keep having that conversation. And I don't know about you, but, having to spend all eternity knowing exactly everything wrong that you did, that you didn't think about and deal with and try to make right when you were on Earth, that, I mean, maybe it's not eternal punishment for everyone, but that does not sound like my idea of a good time. And I'm just mentioning that because I think that it's important when we're talking about mercy that we also talk about justice, right? Because you get mercy not because you aren't willing to submit yourself to justice, it's that you're willing to submit yourself to justice. And God says, you know what? We're good. Like maybe you did that, but you tried to fix it and we're good, right? Because I don't know about you, but like I've known very few actual monsters in my life. I've known a lot of basically good people who did some kind of cruddy stuff. And maybe that's what mercy is supposed to be. Suck it up, get the shot, do the best you can, and then you get ice cream on the way home. Wow. These are just things I think about when I'm listening to Peter go, yeah, let's do the thing. I don't know. What else did people think? I've talked too much.
I don't know. Well, you're talking about subjecting, you get mercy because you're willing to subject yourself to justice.
Yeah.
I do think that is the actual solution to this like spate of men accused of things, and they're like, well, now I'm a Christian. It's all gone because I felt really bad about it, but I have changed.
Mhm.
And you're like, no, you have to do the justice part as well.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
we're glad. Like, we're not mad,
yeah.
but
Yeah. Well, I think that the difference is that in a capitalist society, there's a tendency to think that free and cheap are the same thing.
Mm,
And sometimes you get something for free because you can't afford it and somebody gives it to you anyway. And sometimes that's the only way that you can get that.
hmm
And I think that when, you have people are like, oh, well, I was forgiven, right? Well, it doesn't get into, well, what does repentance actually look like? What does it actually, and that is why I think it's important that we're reminded that, if anybody wants to cash in on the, free soul reset, and, and also today is another one of the days that Catholics renew their baptismal vows. So it's like, again, it's like, yep, okay, still good. Yep, yep. I renounce Satan, all his works. Okay, let's keep going. But I really do think that that's why it's important that there's also a requirement to go to communion, to before going to communion, to go to confession. Because the important thing about going to confession is that even though it's private, even though nobody will ever tell, even though nobody will ever know what was said, you still have to sit down in front of another human being and say what you did. And, there are,
Totally.
there are people who have left their parish because they did not want to go and have to give confession to that priest. And sometimes that's because the priest was a jerk, and sometimes it's because they knew they were wrong.
I don't know. I think we don't do that.
Oh yeah, oh, that's right. You guys don't do confession. I know that's like so weird to me. Like just like on a deep level that like that like that Anglicans just like got rid of sacramental confession.
Yeah, we don't do, and the tradition I grew up in doesn't do
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, yeah.
Mostly because that would smack too closely of uh
Yeah.
being
Ha, ha,
giving salvific power and forgiving power.
yeah, exactly.
But that's a whole other
yeah,
bag of worms.
Yeah.
Okay, typically what we do in a service, though, we do have a prayer of like repentance and
Yeah.
requesting forgiveness.
Yeah.
But it is not specific, and we're all saying it together.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it's the I confess to Almighty God and to you, my brothers and sisters. Does that sound familiar?
yeah, it's a little bit different, but
Yeah.
For things I have done, things I have left undone.
Yeah.
But we do not do it during Easter, interestingly enough.
Yeah. But yeah, well, we quit doing it during Holy Week, because during Holy Week it's kind of like, yeah,
the priest is like, please do not give me another thing to do.
Yeah. Well, and also during Holy Week it's kind of like, yeah, you know what you did.
The whole reason this week has a bunch of stuff going on.
Yes, exactly. You know what you did. But yeah, but I don't know. There's something to me that's nice just about this, like just nice little hope. Okay, so are we ready to move on to the good stuff? And by the good stuff, I mean
Mercy wasn't good enough for you?
Oh, well, mercy is good, but here, but we have okay. Oh, okay. I am going to bring this up before um I'm going to bring up my favorite. Well, okay, it's not my favorite, but it's my favorite that's not by Artemisia Gentileschi. My like favorite, my like my it's definitely my one of my favorite Caravaggios. I'm sorry, I have a number of opinions on religious art. Probably because when I was a little kid, I got to go through my like that was my picture book was my dad's old art history textbook. So like I could tell you the difference between like Mannerist and Baroque, like before I could read, but by like looking at them. Okay, so I'm going to go into screen sharing and I am going to show you. This is my very favorite. This is, can you see it okay? This
Not
is,
yet.
okay, you can now see the screen. This is The Incredulity of St. Thomas by Caravaggio. Now, in the lectionary, it doesn't say that he just like stuck his finger in. But, you know, this really shows him kind of like really like getting in there with his finger. And he's like really, really checking it out. And like this image, I think more than any other is why, like, when people think about St. Thomas, they don't think about, oh, Thomas just kind of like looked and poked. Thomas was like really like felt the wound. And I think it has to do with just the power of that image by Caravaggio. And you know, which, you know, again, it's a really good one because it's kind of pulling everything into the real world and making it real. And again, that pulls in very nicely with the Divine Mercy Sunday because the symbol of the Divine Mercy Sunday is here. Let me just go get a holy card. It'll be faster. I'm sorry, I should have had my show and tell items ready. Okay, this is a holy card. We'll be talking about holy cards more on Tuesday, but this is an image of Jesus as the Divine Mercy. And you can see you've got the red and white, or sometimes it'll be red and blue, pouring out from like basically where his heart would be. So the idea is that this is the blood and water that's coming out from the Sacred Heart, from the side wound. So it's kind of pulling together. It's like you have devotion to the side wound, devotion to the Sacred Heart, devotion to the actual rebirth, all happening at the same time, which I've always thought was pretty cool. But the other thing that you get from that is you get this idea of the crucifixion, the final act being almost the way that I like to think of it is it's almost like a C-section, right? It's like salvation is trapped inside and you have to cut. And as somebody who has had a C-section, like I'm with Jesus on this one. If somebody walks over and is like, I want to touch, or like if you've had any kind of an operation, surgery, anything, and somebody comes over and they need to start messing around with wherever it was that that wound was, there's this certain element of like, just don't touch me, people. Just back off, don't touch me. And I think that you kind of see that in the text in Thomas's relation, in Thomas's thing with Jesus, right? And, you know, also let us not forget that, you know, people who have given birth generally have to submit to all kinds of, you know, unpleasant physical, you know, examinations and invasions. And, oh, hey, we need to look at your, you know, whatever part of your body it is. That now just has to be exposed to the world. And personally, I think there's sort of a neat echo of that feeling in there of that just like, I have been through something and you just don't touch me. Like, I just don't want to be touched. But then Thomas needs it. And, so Thomas touches. And because, and, again, it's the sometimes suffering has to happen thing, right? Because, I had a delivery where the nurse had to do stuff inside of me, and I yelled as loud as loud enough for the people at the nurse's station to hear me. Get your effing hands out of me, you mother effing B word. And then she did, and then I was like, okay, yeah, I know that you were just like doing things you needed to do, but in that moment I could not be rational. And she just kind of laughed and she was like, yeah, you weren't on medication. This was after the baby was born. But the point is that, at least for me as like a woman who has given birth, it's nice and empowering to like be able to see something in the gospel that's kind of analogous to that experience, even if that's not something that obviously Jesus not having kids, not having the necessary equipment to have kids also goes through, and that's kind of nice too. And that was kind of what I had to so that was kind of my first initial thought. I have some other thoughts, but I kind of don't want to just babble for half an hour because this channel has too much of me babbling.
I think what's interesting about these verses, and even the ones in Acts, is you can kind of see the new necessities that an early church is going to have as they realize like this big apocalyptic change isn't going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
And as they realize that they're spreading and they're getting farther away, and it's not this like, not that it loses its urgency, but there are going to be people who have never seen Jesus. There are going to be people who have never seen a person who's seen Jesus. And that's so in the text. And, because Thomas is never shamed for this, like wanting to touch, this needing to touch. But, we're commended as people who have never seen to still believe because like these writings exist and these stories exist and the continuity of the community exists, but we didn't.
Yeah.
We're not first century.
Yeah. 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 Well, yeah, exactly. And I think that that's kind of like and I think that what you hit on is kind of like an important, like that sort of like little like laughing acknowledgement, like it's written for us, but not. It's written for us, but also not for us.
I mean, I think they realized we would be here 2,000 years later?
Well,
probably not, but they're beginning to realize that this could be more than like a generation.
Well, they're at least starting to realize that the thing is they're not thinking about us necessarily, like obviously. No. But the thing is that they are thinking about Greeks, right? They are thinking about people that are now in what's now Anatolia. They're thinking about people that are in what's now India. They're thinking about people that are all over the place. And yeah, there is, I think, this very clear like element of like somebody is going to ask, because either you were that person or that person who at some point every little kid hears that story. And I think for a lot of us, at least for me, there was part of me that goes, I am Team Thomas, right? Because, and this is important, like Amanda said, The text doesn't explicitly say that Thomas did anything wrong. He just said that he was just told that it was said of him that having faith was even better. And that's something that I really wanted to pull out and highlight, because very often people are shamed for wanting proof of religious things. And at the same time, people will be shamed for accepting proof of religious things that is not 100% concrete. We have it on videotape scientific evidence, right? And this Thomas story, I think in a lot of ways kind of does both, right? It's like there's nothing actually there that can be proven false, right? We don't know. Did this happen? Did this not happen? We don't know. There's no proof.
Couldn't prove it either
But
way.
at the same time, but at the same time, if you're willing to like trust Thomas, or you're willing to trust John, or you're at least willing to believe that there was some weirdo in the 1st or 2nd century that wrote this down, and that maybe they had heard something. As long as you're willing to give them that little sliver of not impossible, that little bit of credulity, you, or at least I, speaking for myself as a nerdy little kid who was like, I would have stuck my finger in Jesus's side wound. Like 100%, there is no doubt in my mind. I would have done that thing. I know that I would, right? So I can listen to that story and I can say, I know what Thomas did and I know why he did it. And maybe he didn't do the same thing that I would have, knowing what I know now. And maybe I don't need to do it. But I know that there is some weird little guy in the 1st century who, when he saw somebody resurrected from the dead, he had to go take a look and verify it for himself. And that got written down. So it at least provides an answer to the question, how can we be sure about the resurrection that doesn't start and end with sit down and shut up? It's an account of it's how do we have proof of the resurrection? Well, Thomas felt his side. So then it comes down to basically, do you trust Thomas and do you trust John? And that is actually an easier question to handle, because you're taught that you can trust John and you're taught you can trust Thomas, because why would they make stuff up? And I don't know. It's just I just think it's a really neat passage, and I sometimes get a little bit frustrated with people just kind of just not wanting to find out what it means that these are stories, I guess, right? Because it's a story. I mean, it even sounds it sounds like a story. It doesn't sound like somebody's describing factual events. It even ends with this, like great, but wait, could there be more? It even says there's a lot of stuff that happens and I didn't put it in, but this is what we got. Have fun. Happy Easter. I know.
I mean, I think that's like the where you see the kind of nuts and bolts behind the building of the early church.
Yeah.
In the way the story is told, why it's told, what the actual, lesson of the story is, which is not that you should not doubt, but that to believe when you have not seen is something special and extra.
Yeah, exactly. Because, I mean, ultimately, it is harder to believe without seeing, but it's also easier to believe that somebody saw. And I think that that's kind of where, to the extent that there is any genius in the Catholic Church, it's the way that the Catholic Church has given people a way to read back into the first century, right? To, have, like okay, I won't say every, but like a lot of nerdy little Catholic kids have identified with St. Thomas, right? Also, I mean, my Lord and my God is there's a thing when the priest elevates the Eucharist, a lot of people will say, my Lord and my God, right?
Mhm.
So, in that sense, Thomas isn't officially part of a liturgy, but Thomas is still part of the liturgy. Because the idea is that you see the host and it's like all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, totally. That is what that is. And what that is God. And that's but because of that, it's like Catholics, I think that sometimes evangelical Protestants will need to be in the text, so they read themselves back into the text and they read their lives back into the New Testament, or they read their lives back into the biblical patriarchs. Whereas I think that maybe it's different for Catholics, because we're not told this is you. We're told this is someone like you. This is someone you can understand. This is someone who can be a good example. And
Um, I mean,
yeah, well, I mean, it's like, okay, I'm talking about something that is like that I've sort of felt more than like. I'm saying this partly because you are a very smart person and Aldo is a very smart person, and I'm trying to like link our brains together so that we can think about this in a better way, because I know that Protestants like don't really read the Bible that illiterately. But I do think that there's a tendency to say, like, I was at the cross. And it's like, there's not a willingness to put this layer and say, okay, but this was also first century Judea, which isn't your time. So if you're going to do it, you have to learn about it. And I don't know. I feel like I'm trying to like grab onto water, and like the more I try to grab, the more it slides through my hands.
well, okay. So I I don't know that it's necessarily because Protestant and even evangelical are like incredibly broad categories.
Yeah,
So I can
I know,
only
but like
speak.
I'm talking about like, I'm trying to narrow it as much as I can without saying like Pete Hegseth's church. Even though kind of what I mean here is Pete Hegseth's church.
So so I think the healthy version of that is you get the not I mean the you being at the cross thing is kind of about um our sins being there as well. You know, that's a
Yeah,
different sort of theological point.
yeah,
Um but I think the Protestant emphasis on the Bible, you know, particularly the verse in Second Timothy, all scripture is God-breathed and is useful for correction. Again, another Bible verse that I used to know by heart. But anyway, and this is something I have criticized actually, the the idea that it is written for you in particular gets a lot of Protestants in hot water. Because there is a way to read yourself into the text, I think, that lets you be more empathetic, um, and lets you learn the lesson that's there for you. But it going, no, this was for me. God must have a message for me. Gets where, I mean, frankly, the apocalyptic nonsense that is currently underpinning some of the things that are happening right now, um, is where that came from. So yeah, but yeah, that's Pete's Heg says that folks are definitely reading themselves into the text in a way that is
Yeah. Um,
not helpful
yeah.
in any
I,
meaningful way.
yeah, I will just say that Pete Hegseth, I actually heard about his pastor, Doug Wilson, before I heard about him. And so I was probably the first person in the world who, or at least one of the few people in the country who heard Pete Hegseth giving his testimony before Congress. And they asked him, where did he go to church? And he, explained at some point it came out that his pastor was Doug Wilson. And I heard that and I was like, no, because okay, Doug Wilson has his own little like they're trying to take over the town of Moscow, Idaho. Um, he explicitly believes that slavery as it existed in the American South, right? Which was lifetime chattel slavery with virtually no possibility of freedom, no ability to form families, and no requirement that men who had who produced children with an enslaved woman were not required to free her, and they were not required to free their children. And that created all kinds of problems. And Doug Wilson thinks that that was good. And Doug Wilson thinks, yeah. And no,
That's
yeah.
not even.
Yeah, I know. Okay, Doug Wilson thinks that when a woman gets married and she says I do, that is the only time that her consent is necessary for anything that her husband might like to do with her.
Yeah.
He has explicitly talked about how relations between a husband and a wife should not be, and I quote, an egalitarian pleasure party.
Well, it's very first century of him, to be honest.
Actually, no. No, because his idea is that women, because see, Wilson takes that kind of first century sex negativity and he takes it one step worse, because in the first century, everything about the idea that like marital relations are a debt, that kind of thing, yes, that absolutely exists. But in the first century, women are not required to have children. And in fact, marriage and childbearing are discouraged. And that's where people like Wilson take stuff that's problematic to stuff that's toxic. And I'm sorry for dragging into a whole big rant on Doug Wilson, but whenever his name comes up, I always like explain to anyone who is listening, this is who this man is, because he is dangerous.
He's the honestly the biggest danger to outside of to members of his congregation who are women and children. That's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
He's a very explicit danger to that. But his danger is that he believes that Christians, and by Christians he means a very specific kind of Christian, should be in charge of everything and running everything.
Yeah. It's worth mentioning, like straight up front, that he wants to ban like public processions and church bells, if they're for Catholics.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is him.
Well, yeah, I mean, he wants to institute a religious test
Yeah.
for government office and all of that. I mean, he's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
nightmare.
It's really bad. And the point is, though, is that that's kind of like, it's important, I think, to realize that yes, everything that we're talking about has a bad version, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because very often I think that, when people hear people just kind of sitting around calmly talking about, okay, well, this is what this means to me. And like, this is how like the wounds of Thomas kind of made me feel okay about having a C-section. And in fact, make me understand that in some way, like what I went through helps me understand Jesus a little bit more. And therefore, I kind of understand God a little bit more. And it's that ability to like kind of identify, but I can say, but see, as a Catholic, I get to say, I understand God. I don't get to say, I am God. I get to say that I understand Thomas. I don't get to say that I am Thomas or that Thomas is me or that we are really all that like each other. It's just that we understand each other. And they're like, I know I'm talking about something that's like, it's almost not there. It's such a small distinction. But I think that there's a difference between is me and is like me that is really important. Because it's also kind of the same way that like Catholics think about the Eucharist, right? There's a difference between is and is like. The Eucharist isn't like God's body, it is God's body. And the difference is the difference between being Jesus and understanding Jesus and putting your hand in Jesus' side. I don't know. I'm probably just going too far into the deep end, but I also feel like too that like as we're talking about this and we're just like grooving on the mysticism, it's also important to understand that like nobody in this room is saying what they're saying or sitting there nodding as they're nodding because this came easy to any of us. Like all of us have walked away from the religion we were raised with and have kind of found our own tradition and our own faith and our own peace kind of within what we were given. But that doesn't mean it's easy.
This is why I maintain
Yeah.
deconstruction is important.
Yeah.
Everybody should do it at some point
Yeah.
because the faith of your childhood cannot be the faith of your adulthood. You have to take it apart, bang it around, put it back together.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
not,
And
whatever.
yeah. And I do think that that is something that that Protestants have done better is like there is a whole deconstruction movement. And I know that it was actually really useful for me to kind of like look at, Protestant deconstruction stuff, both because I saw myself in it and because I didn't.
Yeah.
There's things that absolutely devastate a lot of Protestants that if you're Catholic are a non-issue. And the problem is with Catholic, if you're Catholic, it's really easy to kind of walk away and kind of like to sort of like move back and forth and not admit to yourself that you really have a problem. But at the same time, it also means that a lot of Catholics process their religious trauma within the church because you don't necessarily have to leave to process your trauma. Like at various points, I'll talk about my weird, my sort of weird Catholic upbringing where I got all kinds of bad theology taught to me. But at the same time, one of the things that really let me heal from that was I just made an appointment with a priest I trusted, and we were just kind of, like talked about stuff and talked about my life for about an hour. And like, like periodically, like I would talk about stuff that I had been told, and he would just look at me and he'd be like, but like seriously. And one time he actually laughed at something my dad had said, but knowing that my dad would have been laughed at, like if this guy had been there, my dad would have gotten laughed at and he would have been told that he was wrong. Well, there's healing in that. There's healing in finding out that no, you actually do have a place and that you can't get kicked out, which, of course, is also the point of everything that we were reading today. It's people finding out that you can't get kicked out and that there will always be somewhere for you. And I don't know, that's where we are. Did anybody have anything else? I know we've kind of been going for a while. Okay, so parish announcements. As you've been able to see, I've decided to kind of restructure the way we do things around here because I've decided that over the course of the next 2 years, I don't know when, I don't know how, but I'm going to work on going back to graduate school, probably polish up my language skills. I don't know what I've got to do. It's a long time, and this is probably the last time I'll talk about it until I have an actual update. But because of that, we're kind of classing the joint up a little bit. We're trying to do things a little more seriously and do things in a way that, lets us talk about contemporary Catholicism as it's lived. But in order to do that, we're still going to be keeping the Sunday show because the heart of the way that Catholics read the Bible and the way that Catholics work with the Bible and talk through those texts together is central. And then on Tuesdays, we're going to have a good time. There will be a live stream. We'll talk about like just church history, funky stuff that's going on. And then Thursday, we talk about kind of contemporary, like this is what's in the news. This is the context that you need to know. So Thursday, I'm going to kind of talk about, what is the Avignon papacy? And, and why is Avignon captivity, as someone put it, the activation code for lapsed Catholics? Because there are so many people who were like, they said they might do what to the Pope? That is not allowed. Yeah, people are like, no, bring me my rosary. And of course, I will just say this is spoilers, is that the other thing that you have to understand is if you see Pope Leo being slow and Pope Leo being measured and Pope Leo having just incredible patience and incredible restraint, I just ask you to remember one thing. The Catholic Church unilaterally disarmed in 1870. We have a very small group of personal bodyguards that take care of the Pope. Otherwise, the Catholic Church has no land outside of the property that belongs to various parish churches and religious organizations. We don't have an army, but what Leo has is people. But the problem is that Leo also believes that people are a precious resource, which means that, as we will talk about on Thursday, Pope Leo has a coup button. Pope Leo might even have a revolution button. Pope Leo could, in theory, preach a crusade. But the problem about crusades, and this is the challenge that that perhaps Jesus faced when he decided that he was going to be crucified, as opposed to starting the Bar Kokhba revolt 40 years early. And, this is what, the popes felt and this is what the popes felt when they had to set things aside. They said, you know what? We're not going to get people killed. We're not going to do crusades anymore. We're just going to write sternly worded emails and tell people to show up. Because the thing is that Pope Leo knows that if he wanted, there are a whole bunch of young men on the internet, and they want nothing more than to throw hands for Jesus. And some of them want to do it for good reasons, and some of them want to do it for bad reasons. And some of them really, you know what? You know the kind of guy who watches hockey games for the fights? And you know the kind of guy who, if somebody says something about his mom, he stands up and he says, "You want to go? Let's go. Let's go outside right now, because I'm not going to put up with that." That guy exists in every Catholic church. And there is part of his soul, because I have that same feeling in my soul, that says it would be really good to just go. But we can't do that, because Leo also speaks English, and that means that he remembers the Pilgrimage of Grace. And the Pilgrimage of Grace was what happened after Henry VIII started the English Reformation, and a whole bunch of stuff went down, and there was a popular uprising in the North, and it got suppressed, and it did not become legal to be Roman Catholic in England until 1791. So, and oh, by the way, Delaware, yeah, that's the Delaware family. It's a refuge for Catholics. I like I just want to close, because it's like, basically what I'm saying is, trust the process and trust the Pope. I mean, be ready to defend the Pope, back our boy to the hilt, but also understand that if he's being slow, it's because he realizes that he might have the power to get a whole bunch of people really hurt. And I'm not saying he won't ask for martyrs. I'm saying he won't ask for martyrs lightly, and he won't ask for martyrs first.
Well, yeah, I mean, just as somebody from a military family, like many generations, there's a cost.
Yeah.
That I think most people do not understand.
Yeah.
I mean, I really genuinely think that people do not understand.
Yeah.
The cost of war and revolution.
Yeah.
On an incredibly massive scale. I think your average American just has no real concept of what that's like.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, I would be unwilling to enter that lightly.
Yeah, exactly. And hopefully we won't be asked to, because, hopefully, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe we'll get lucky. Okay. Or maybe we won't. And apparently my phone is telling me that, oh, well, it's 5:40. We've been out this for a little over an hour and a half. So we've talked about what's going on. I don't think I had anything else. I didn't mean to get into the long trust the Pope rant, but there we did. Trust the Pope. Submit to Rome if you feel like it.
Probably not. Probably not.
But if you did feel like it.
Leo seems like a great guy.
Yeah.
Well, I'd be willing to be friends.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Actually, since we have since I actually have an Anglican on the air, and I can just ask you this, um, I think that there is a okay. Leo is trying to put the. This is my theory of the case. Leo is a man from Chicago, and Leo understands that sometimes you got to get the band back together. And Leo is like, it strikes me that Leo is kind of going around like a kid, like the new kid in the lunchroom, going, "Hey, can I sit next to you? Can we be friends? Do you want to come over to my house? You can like look at my chapel. It's really neat. We can have communion together. I'm really good at communion." And the thing is that I mean, I don't know if the Archbishop of Canterbury is like listening to him and going, "Yeah, that sounds kind of awesome." And you guys already
it's a
gave
lady. It's a lady.
it's a lady, right, right, right. But see, that's the trick, though, is that that's not necessarily a problem. And I'll tell you why. Okay. Because the Anglican Church never went into schism over theology.
I
They
think
no walk with me. They didn't go into schism over theology. And the Anglican Church got their right by translating the Sarum Rite into English. It's the old approved rite, which was never abolished, and it's still there. So theoretically, there actually is a way that the Pope could let y'all back in as Sarum Rite Catholics and might even be willing to say, "Oh, you want women's ordination? Sure. Anybody, if you're a Catholic woman, you can be ordained." And I mean, I'm not saying it's likely. But what I'm trying to figure out is like, I know from my point of view, I'm like, yes, yes, this will solve all of our problems and cause no new ones. And I know there are a lot
yeah,
of
sure.
and I know there are a lot of new problems. So I'm just asking for someone sitting in an Anglican church, if like mother, what's your mother's name?
Nan.
Nan. Okay. If Mother Nan gets up and says, "Guess what, guys? Like, how is that going to play out? Like, what are the negotiables? What are the non-negotiables?" I'm just having fun here, but I'm
I
just
think
curious.
I think the difficulty is I think like Catholicism tends to run in families in a way that like some of the other sects don't.
Yeah.
Um, except for mine. We've been Baptist and Methodist for centuries, but that's a whole other story. I think the difficulty would be partially, well, part of the problem is at my church, about half the room are refugees from the other low churches. Like Baptists and all that, who went, oh, you know what? I need it to be affirming, or I need, something else. Um, I need women's ordination. I need,
Yeah.
all sorts of other things going on. Um, so I guess that's part of it. I think part of the difficulty would be, and I can't speak for like Anglican, I'm just speaking like as an American with in an American context. I think the difficulty with any of like reattach to Rome, resubmit to Rome problem is the American tendency to say, well, I'll start my own church.
Yeah.
I mean, because we have just a proliferation of Christian sects in a way that is just sort
Yeah.
of weird, honestly. But that's
Yeah.
just a very American thing to do. And I think that would be part of it, the
Uh-huh.
difficulty. And then, so I think, I mean, I'm sure there are probably Episcopal congregations that would be like, okay, Sweet.
Yeah.
Sweet. And then there would be other ones that would go, no. No. And I don't know how that would work. Because like, maybe I should ask my friend Ellen, who grew up Catholic,
Yeah.
and her husband who grew up in Baptist tradition.
Yeah. So
So
therefore
we
they
met in the
have
middle at Episcopalian.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm just kind of curious because there's always whenever things change, there's always the push and the pull,
I think the affirming thing, the women's ordination thing would be super difficult for a lot of people. Like I think there's a certain aspect of that, like if you go to an Episcopal church, overall the general idea is like affirming, and also like, allows women ordination, but there'll be churches that lean more conservative where they wouldn't hire a woman rector. They wouldn't say that, but they just wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
And they probably wouldn't like tell you that you're not welcome, but
You would be made not welcome.
there wouldn't be anything explicitly welcoming you.
Yeah.
Like there would be no pin on somebody investments saying you are welcome here with
Yeah.
the Progress Pride colors, that kind of thing. Um, so I think that would be the sticking point, I think. Because I think there's some people who would be like, no, I can't, we can't submit to Rome unless they are willing to meet us where we're at. Like it's
Yeah.
cool to have a church that's like in communion with us, but they're not over us.
Yeah.
That we're hoping we can drag them along.
Yeah.
Like some of the African churches
Yeah.
got all upset about the
Yeah.
Archbishop of Canterbury.
Yeah. That's true.
And there was some talk of schism there, and then they decided they didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
And the rest of the church is kind of like, okay, we know that you're not where we are, but we're in this together. We're gonna try to
Yeah.
pull you along.
Yeah. And of course, back to Schism Watch, that is something that the SSPX could potentially try to exploit. I don't know. It is interesting. It is also Divine Mercy Sunday. It is also late. So we should go. We'll see you back on Tuesday.